Today on the podcast, our monthly news and analysis episode, we'll take a look at a crazy story that's unfolding in Florida, the ongoing battle between the governor's office and the Disney-centered Reedy Creek Improvement District. We've been following this story for a while, but it suddenly exploded with political intrigue, backroom deals, corporate strategies that may ultimately influence a national election, and billion-dollar plans that might also shape the future of the Florida resort. Over this past month, the story grew so large that it will comprise our entire episode today. And then later this month, as we've done a couple of times in the past, we'll also post up our usual magazine-style anthology that will explore the other key stories as they relate to the Disney company. So, if you're ready, buckle up, because you are about to enter a corporate political world where things may be different than they seem. Press releases aren't necessarily about communicating information, and two men, Bob Iger and Ron DeSantis, battled to preserve the identity of their brands vis-a-vis the struggle to oversee the land in and around Disney World. Okay, here we go. Our featured story on this episode is the ongoing political battle over the Disney District in Florida. These issues exploded over the past month. The drama over the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which is a story that we've been following for over a year. To catch everyone up, last February, former CEO Bob Chapek, responding to employee concerns, explained that the Disney company would work to overturn what is commonly called the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. In response, the Florida legislature developed a bill to dissolve the Reedy Creek Improvement District. Reedy Creek, in many ways, acts as the governing county for the land in and around the Disney World resort. According to DeSantis, in his recently published autobiography, he told the House Speaker that we need to work on this in a tight circle. There can be no leaks. We need the element of surprise. Nobody can see this coming. The bill was intended to put an end to the high degree of autonomy the Disney Resort had enjoyed over the past 50 years. To be fair, the 1967 Reedy Creek Act, a collection of highly detailed policies, rights, and obligations, gave the Disney company the ability to act in ways that many people might see as being outside civic roles typically granted to a company. For example, Disney had the right to build a private nuclear power plant, and it also had the right to build an airport for commercial travel. In modern-day America, these are not rights that are typically given to American companies. It was a magnitude of power that exceeded other agreements in the state. But the underlying problem here wasn't that the state government wanted to revisit those rights that Disney held from a 1967 act, which may have been a legitimate role for state oversight. Rather, the state wanted to publicly arrange its cultural identity, in contrast to that of the California-based company, with Reedy Creek being a type of political casualty or punishment in this war of brands. Though back in 1966 and 1967, it took months to develop the Reedy Creek Act, and though the district also operates under Florida's Uniform Special Districts Accountability Act, the bill to dissolve Reedy Creek was just 2 pages long. After the bill was signed into law, DeSantis announced Florida's victory over what he then called a woke Burbank corporation, suggesting yet again that this was payback for then CEO Bob Chapek's statements about the Florida Don't Say Gay bill. And then the problems began. What immediately became clear was that the vast majority of Congress people in Florida didn't understand how the Reedy Creek Improvement District actually worked, nor did they understand that to dissolve it would likely place over $1 billion of tax liability onto Orange and Osceola counties, which were then set to govern the Disney World area. Once that was clear, the state legislature then wanted to undo the bill they had just passed, but still create a situation in which the state government would demonstrate its authority to the Disney company, which for years had had a very friendly relationship with the board members overseeing Reedy Creek. The new solution was to create a new board in which the state governor picked the members, which created a situation in which governor appointees potentially controlled how the Disney resort was able to expand. As we left off last time, which was in our February news episode, the state legislature had just passed this new bill to undo the proposed dissolution of Reedy Creek and to rename it the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board. According to this new bill, House Bill 9B, the new board would only include members appointed by the governor. The one stipulation, new members cannot have worked at a theme park or in a theme park-related industry within the previous 3 years. As we ended last time, it appeared that the governor's office had the upper hand in this standoff, and this is where we begin today. On February 27th, the governor signed the bill into law at the Reedy Creek Fire Department. The fire department was one Reedy Creek division that was supportive of a government takeover, as some firefighters believed that this would ensure the solvency of their pensions and also lead to more funding for new hires and equipment, whereas in recent years the fire department had been at odds with the then current Reedy Creek board. Back at the start of the year, a union representative for Firefighters Local 2117 told reporters, "Anything has got to be better than what we currently have. We really hope that this new board will bring the morale up for Reedy Creek and will make us an elite emergency services department again." At the Firehouse press conference where he signed this bill into law, Governor DeSantis explained that the corporate kingdom will come to an end. He also said that there is a new sheriff in town. He congratulated himself and his staff on their efforts, saying, "This is what accountability looks like." The first meeting of the new board would be just over a week later, on March 8th. At this time, Jeff Val, president of Disney World, posted a statement. "We are focused on the future and are ready to work within this new framework, and we will continue to innovate, inspire, and bring joy to the millions of guests who come to Florida to visit Walt Disney World every year." For a while, DeSantis touted his victory, going so far as to publish an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal called "Why I Stood Up to Disney." In it, he said, "When corporations try to use their economic power to advance a woke agenda, they become political and not merely economic actors. In such an environment, reflexively deferring to big business effectively surrenders the political battlefield to the militant left." These statements, as one might suspect, were met with disdain from those on the left. Democratic State Representative Anna Escamani from Orlando said, "It sends a message to any private individual or company that if you don't purport to what the governor wants, then you'll be punished." Along with the Wall Street Journal article, DeSantis also had a new memoir, which many saw as a prelude to a forthcoming presidential bid. The book, called The Courage to Be Free, not only discussed the reasons that years ago DeSantis held his wedding at Disney, but also why he felt it was important to stand up to the company. In his book, he called the passage of that recent bill the Florida equivalent of the shot heard around the world. All of these elements, the wedding, the Florida bill, and the proposed dissolution of Reedy Creek, are combined into one chapter called The Magic Kingdom of Woke Corporatism. Again, the book narrative made it very clear that the bill to dissolve Reedy Creek was directly related to Disney's extended stance against the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. In other words, the discussion in the book was framed in cultural terms, not so much in terms pertaining to civic and developers' rights currently held by a board very friendly to Disney. DeSantis explained in the book that he was battling Disney to protect young children in Florida, as he felt that Disney had overstepped their bounds as a corporation in forwarding what he called a false leftist narrative. This explanation again places what may have been a legitimate effort to review rights given to a company 50 years ago as an extension of a cultural discussion unrelated to land development rights. In essence, Reedy Creek became collateral damage related to ex-CEO Bob Chapek's statements about a Florida bill focused on gender and identity education in public schools. The book refers to Disney as radiating the values of Southern California, which DeSantis repeatedly calls a leftist enclave. And in doing so, it further muddies the waters between cultural identity battles and development rights of a special district. For a while following the passage of this second bill, it seemed as though this matter was settled with the governor picking board members for the special district and Disney rather oddly doing its best to go along with that decision, even though up until Jeff Val made that unusual statement about Disney being ready to work within this new framework, the company had battled consistently to protect Reedy Creek. This period of relative peace lasted about 2 weeks. What was not widely known at this time, and likely wasn't widely known within the company, was that in its final days, during late January and early February, the Reedy Creek leadership in a special session reallocated how power now worked within the special district moving forward. These decisions, which essentially shifted some power from the district to the company, were voted on by the board and became policy. The Reedy Creek board was unpaid. They could receive $25 per diem and travel expenses to cover mileage from their house to the Reedy Creek office, but outside of this, their positions were essentially volunteer work. Despite this, their final acts likely took significant thought. Leadership was careful to make sure that all forward-looking policy, developers' agreements, and covenants complied with Florida law. These discussions and votes were held on January 25th and February 8th in sessions that were open to the public. Notices concerning these meetings were published in each case well over a week before the meeting itself. This is important because under Florida law, changes to public entities, if negotiated and planned in secret, can be voided. But in this, the changes in policy and various agreements were made in public view with hardly anyone watching, particularly those associated with the governor's office. Though it's possible for courts to undo these agreements if Disney made a misstep, I'm guessing that Disney and the old Reedy Creek board carefully made sure all elements were legal and binding. Without this, the state is unable to amend any contract. Reporters from local news stations and newspapers did attend those two meetings. They did pick up some elements from the discussion, but the reporting was largely tied to Disney announcing that they were considering a fifth theme park, which under this new development agreement, the company would fully control regardless as to what the new governor-appointed board had to say about it. I should point out that at this point, a fifth park seemed like a long shot. Disney's Animal Kingdom about 25 years ago cost around $1 billion to open. Based on the development cost of more recent Disney parks, a fifth gate, even a small one, would cost at least $4 billion, and a larger park would cost somewhere between $6 and $8 billion if it were built within the next few years. Specifically, the outgoing board, before their duties ended, pre-approved massive levels of development over the next 9 years through 2032, which included the possibility of one major theme park, 2 minor theme parks such as Typhoon Lagoon or Blizzard Beach, 1 million square feet of retail and restaurant space, thereby increasing its present holdings by nearly 70%, and another 14,000 hotel or resort rooms, which would include DVC developments. Disney has not agreed to develop any of this, but these development possibilities, according to these new district documents, are now under Disney's control, not control of the board. The new agreement also placed creative distance between Disney and the newly named Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. The district expressly cannot use the Disney name, including Walt Disney World, nor its characters, without express permission from the company. The company has the right to sue over any infringement, with the suit specifically being brought to the Circuit Court in Orange County, which tends to view the Disney company from a favorable perspective. Then the old board members left and the new ones arrived. New board members, as a group, could loosely be described as DeSantis allies. These include Brian Onks Jr., who comes from a political family whose father was a longtime Republican mayor of Clearwater, Michael Sasso, head of the Orlando chapter of the conservative legal group, the Federalist Society, and Bridget Ziegler, co-founder of Moms for Liberty. She is also married to the chairman of the Florida Republican Party. That is, in terms of this battle at this point, nothing was particularly nuanced on either side. At the first meeting, board members didn't yet realize that the previous board had limited their powers. Board members talked about the possibility of dissolving what was called at that meeting the essentially fictitious cities of Bay Lake and Lake Buena Vista. As we've talked about on previous podcast episodes, these two cities, likely planned as a political backup strategy in 1967, offered Disney an opportunity to set up favorable governing bodies if something were ever to happen to the special district. New board member Brian Onks said, "Whether or not these two cities are legally necessary is an important question." Bridget Ziegler said that she wanted to review how the district might regulate requirements of the COVID era moving forward, presumably if there were another pandemic, as at the moment there were no COVID requirements at Disney World outside of medical offices on property. "I believe the role of government is to be limited," she said. But then, after announcing a new identity for the special district, board members learned that they had no power to enact any of these changes. They were now, at best, a group of 5 transportation managers. Though back in 2022, DeSantis tried to surprise Disney with his bill to dissolve Reedy Creek, keeping it quiet so Disney couldn't send in its lobbyists. As it turned out, 1 year later, Disney had a far larger and more damaging surprise for DeSantis. Under the new arrangement, with the new covenant, with its restrictions, the governor-appointed board would now mostly oversee roads and other civic functions. "We lose control of everything other than to maintain the roads and maintain the infrastructure," one board member said, as he realized that his new role was to be a volunteer road manager for a private resort. Another manager said, "It completely circumvents the authority of the board to govern." Revised policies gave Disney robust rights over the district. It gave Disney the ability to veto any project approved by the board for roads, infrastructure, building permits, and even to some extent in terms of the district's finances. Any changes to the Reedy Creek property would be subject to Walt Disney Parks and Resorts' prior review and comment. New board members hired lawyers to review and analyze how the existing board reworked power arrangements for the new board, and this set up yet another absurdity. The Reedy Creek board gets money by taxing Disney, so Disney, in essence, will be paying the new board to hire lawyers to potentially sue them. Though I do wonder if there might be a countersuit directed at the board members at some point for misuse of district funds. Some of the lawyers the new board are considering hiring have an hourly billing rate of $795. An ongoing dispute like this could quickly pile up legal bills of over $1 million, or more likely millions of dollars. The new board also indicated that they might replace John Class, who was a district administrator who presumably helped facilitate those policy changes. For the most part, Disney remained quiet, refusing requests for interviews about the matter. But they did issue one statement. All agreements signed between Disney and the district were appropriate and were discussed and approved in open, noticed public forums in compliance with Florida's government in the Sunshine Law. These changes to the district were also met long before the date once used to dissolve Reedy Creek and before management of the board changed hands. One outside attorney said, "I'm struggling to find a reason why it's unlawful." From a certain perspective, the changes in agreements and covenants might simply be a tool that Disney is using to ensure consistency in how they are able to manage their resort in Florida, which is by far the largest Disney resort in the world. Though these maneuvers might be seen as a type of escalation or one-upsmanship, they might also be a way to create a stable business environment that is not subject to the whims of the current governor, particularly as the governor didn't fill the board with people who held diverse views as he initially claimed he would. He packed it with people who held political views very similar to his own. One news outlet asked the governor's office if they were aware of these changes before they appointed new members to be seated in the district. The governor's office admitted that they were not, which left them looking naive and outmaneuvered. Supporters of Trump were quick to seize on this as a way of highlighting differences between Trump and DeSantis, who would be likely rivals for the Republican nomination. A spokesperson for a Trump re-election PAC said, "Ron DeSantis got out-negotiated by Mickey Mouse." The local paper, the Orlando Sentinel, picked up on this thread as well. Disney was playing 4D chess while the governor's legal team was fumbling with a bag of checkers. Under the previous arrangement, most of the power and planning over Reedy Creek was maintained in public space with open meetings. But now, if Disney so wanted, as some elements of power were effectively transferred from the district to Disney, those meetings, moving forward, could now take place inside of a conference room with the doors closed. That is essentially what has happened here. There is now the possibility for less oversight, not more. It was as though the Florida equivalent to that shot heard around the world ended up ricocheting and hitting the person who fired the gun, leaving the state ultimately with less power than they had before all of this started. Governor DeSantis' office then issued a statement attempting once more to frame the issue within his control. The executive office of the governor is aware of Disney's last-ditch efforts to execute contracts just before ratifying the new law that transfers rights and authorities from the former Reedy Creek Improvement District to Disney. An initial review suggests that these agreements may have significant legal infirmities that would render the contracts void as a matter of law. We are pleased the new governor-appointed board retained multiple financial and legal firms to conduct audits and investigate Disney's past behavior. On March 31st, Attorney General Ashley Moody requested that previous board members of Reedy Creek turn over all materials, including personal texts that concerned discussion around the policy changes. But without a judge's order, this request was likely to produce little. Also on March 31st, Governor DeSantis, while on that book tour, said, "There's a lot of back and forths right now with the state taking control, but rest assured, you ain't seen nothing yet. There's more to come in that regard." He later said they, meaning Disney, basically got everything they wanted for the many decades they've been operating in Florida until now. During these same days, again, the governor tried to claim a type of victory, similar to the victory he claimed when the initial 2-page bill was passed, a bill that nearly everyone in government then quickly tried to distance themselves from, also similar to the victory he announced at the fire station when he announced that there was a new sheriff in town. This issue, at least in terms of policy, has not gone well for DeSantis, though he's been able to strongly fundraise off of it, with an eye toward building a war chest for a presumed forthcoming presidential run. That is, the more Disney pushes back, the more opportunities DeSantis has to use this ongoing dispute as a way to present himself as a political official who fights against companies like Disney, which he describes as woke. In this, though he's far from a policy win, he has framed this dispute to create a financial win. From a certain standpoint, perhaps, this is a calculated decision. That is, it may be acceptable to lose ground on the policy battle if it creates a path to better fund a presidential campaign. But with Trump allies seizing on this issue to paint an image of DeSantis as weak, DeSantis on April 3rd escalated the dispute, perhaps because the issues as they played out in the newspapers were now affecting his personal brand. DeSantis asked Melinda Miguel, Florida's Chief Inspector General, to review and investigate those policies that now limit the power of his personally selected board members. These collusive and self-dealing arrangements aim to nullify the recently passed legislation, undercut Florida's legislative process, and defy the will of Floridians. DeSantis wrote, any legal or ethical violation should be referred to the proper authorities. The suggestion here is that DeSantis would like Miguel to explore the issue for possible criminal charges, not just civil ones. But I'm confused as to what type of criminal charges can be brought against board members who announced their meetings, opened them to the public, held public votes, and then posted the outcome. A Florida statute does allow 60 days of jail time and a $500 fine for those who knowingly bypass a public process. But there was clear public process here, only the allies of the governor weren't watching. At this point, nearly all statements made by the governor's office and by Disney officials should be viewed as a type of public discourse largely designed to place pressure on the other side as a way of exerting or at least threatening a position of control. Does DeSantis believe that his people can bring criminal charges against ex-board members? I'm guessing not. Does Disney believe that it can avoid all oversight by handicapping the new board in perpetuity? Again, probably not. But at this point, the dialogue is arranged as expressions of power, with Disney making DeSantis look ill-prepared to handle large issues as he launches a presidential bid, and DeSantis continually threatening to limit Disney through various acts of state government, such as creating a district board that will slow down Disney or devalue a Disney vacation, even if the board is only able to do so by delaying work on roads. DeSantis's public image, or at least the one he's aiming for, is one of oversight and strength, which is why Disney's subterfuge is so damaging as it undercuts his brand. CEO Bob Iger is casting Disney's image as one of reason and acceptance. This was highlighted at the 2023 shareholders meeting when he discussed the Florida issue. A year ago, he said, the company took a position on pending Florida legislation, and while the company may not have handled the position that it took very well, a company has a right to freedom of speech just like individuals do. In taking that position, the governor got very angry, and he decided to retaliate against us, including the naming of a new board. That just seems really wrong to me, not just against any company or individual, but particularly against the company that means so much to the state where you live. And this is why DeSantis reframing Disney as a renegade woke company is so damaging for Disney, as it undercuts the brand that Iger, after the mess of Chapek, is trying to build for the company. What's clear now, post-Chapek, is that Disney is developing a viable strategy to approach the current political problems in Florida. Bob Iger, as a craftsperson of policy, is a more serious opponent than Bob Chapek, and this leaves Ron DeSantis in a difficult spot. At the moment, it seems that DeSantis has far more to lose than Disney, especially if he makes a bid for the Republican nomination. Also, at least in this moment, Disney appears to have the potential to give more to Florida's economy than DeSantis as well. At that same shareholders meeting on April 3rd, Iger explained that the Disney company planned to invest $17 billion in their Florida resort over the next 10 years, which he estimated would create 13,000 new jobs, which is roughly a 20% employment increase. The talk about large capital investments harkens back to those agreements made between Disney and the Reedy Creek Board that allowed them to, if they chose, build one large theme park, two minor parks, and an endless line of new hotel rooms, restaurants, and stores without future approval from the board. That is, this announcement points back to recent policy changes released by Reedy Creek. Back in February, to some, the optimistic expansion of a new theme park looked like a political trick to demonstrate Disney's potential value to the state. But now those offerings look, at least in part, like a possibility. $17 billion is a lot of money, more than enough for another theme park, plus hotels, shopping, expansions for existing parks, and so on. But also, maybe consider this. For over 20 years, the Florida plan has been to expand capacity at existing parks, not to build a new one. I'm pretty sure Disney has endless surveys that reveal if 5 parks really sell more tickets than 4 parks that have new attractions. But at minimum, this means that the Disney company is discussing meaningful expansion at Disney World. But also that expansion right now is amorphous. Nothing has been announced, and even if specifics for, say, new attractions were given, longtime fans know to take it with a grain of salt. Remember all those announcements for the Epcot redo? The Play Pavilion, the refresh of Spaceship Earth, the Mary Poppins attraction, and so on. They are all either on some type of permanent hold or have been canceled. Also, any type of major outlay like this in terms of money is likely dependent on better financial results from Disney+, which over this past year has hemorrhaged money. Right now, profits from the parks are backfilling losses on the streamer. Disney Plus likely needs to stabilize before major investment to the tune of many billions of dollars can be lavished on the Florida resort. And finally, Iger is talking about a period of the resort's development that will happen after he steps down as CEO. And simply, priorities can change with new leadership. So, the potential here for investment is positive. Clearly, plans are being explored, but this is far from a done deal. But to get back to the main point of this episode, which is the issue about oversight of Reedy Creek, or what is now called the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, will almost surely end up in court. Already, there have been court cases brought against the dissolution of Reedy Creek by residents, but now, as the dispute is between the special district and the state of Florida, any future case will likely end up in federal court, which may be more open to Disney's position than various state courts. Also, the new board is looking to hire legal firms that have previous experience appearing before the U.S. Supreme Court, which likely gives you some idea of where this whole thing might eventually end up a few years from now. Again, at the moment, this is a dialogue of threats and posturing. The decisions by that outgoing Reedy Creek board likely bought Disney a lot of time to negotiate a favorable end to this standoff. But with the country quickly moving toward presidential primary season, DeSantis may have less time to work through his options than does Disney, which also points to the likelihood of a more favorable outcome for Disney, assuming the battle between Disney and Florida doesn't extend beyond the current governor's time in office. Also, over the past month, with the media focused on Trump and his indictment in New York, Trump's numbers concerning the presidential primary have risen in the polls, while DeSantis's have fallen, and significantly so. In February, polls indicated that DeSantis was favored to get the 2024 Republican nomination. More recent polls have Trump at 47% to DeSantis at 33%, and then an even later poll has Trump at 51% compared to DeSantis at 26%. This reversal happened during the most recent chapter in the Reedy Creek saga, the events that we've discussed here today. And clearly there were more significant elements that led to the change in polling numbers, such as DeSantis' initial position on the war in Ukraine that he had to walk back after it alienated many Republicans, and the fact that Trump, with his legal difficulties in New York, presently has a national platform to express his opinions. But the narrative that Disney outmaneuvered the governor in his home state didn't help DeSantis' public identity. And I certainly don't want to turn our show into a political podcast, but I bring up these factors only because they speak to how the issues with Reedy Creek will likely move forward. Because of a drop in the polls, DeSantis may be more incentivized to pivot away from Disney and focus on an issue that will provide a quicker and surer political win than the deep and complex quagmire that the Reedy Creek issue has now become. DeSantis has limited time before the primaries, and the Reedy Creek path, though initially useful for his campaign image, may now be too much of an unpredictable issue on which to focus his time and message, and this too bodes well for Disney. The last time we covered this issue, DeSantis appeared to have the upper hand, but now the opposite appears true, but we are far from the end of the story, as I'm sure new events will spill out in the months ahead. I'll be back next week with a new episode. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions. You can support our efforts by becoming a monthly Bandcamp subscriber. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes, but the best reason to join is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can become a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until then, this is Todd James Pierce.